Greetings, attendees, and welcome. If you could please type in your name and where you're tuning in from in the comments box, much appreciated. Like this video so others in your network can enjoy this content. Welcome to IFMA's latest installment of the North America Operations and Maintenance Qualitative Benchmark Report webinar. Key difference from today's report being launched versus the September 2022 North America 2023 North America report is that the report today in the webinar focuses on the FM processes used to support his or her job. The report is or will be available later on this afternoon in the IFMA bookstore. Participants on this study will receive a complimentary report. The cost of the report will be for IFMA members $285 and for non-IFMA members $375. Today's presenter is Jake Smithwick, Associate Professor, Graduate Program Director, Construction and Facilities Engineering at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Jake, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and good evening, good morning, or good afternoon to you all. Thank you for being here today. We're very excited to go through our topic and our presentation. And with that said, we'll get the slides pulled up. Again, I see many of you introducing yourselves. I see somebody from Amy in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm right down the road. So Amy, be sure to stop by and say hi sometime. But anyhow, thanks for being here today, folks. Our topic, our agenda, we're going to go through a couple different things related to this particular study. As Nick mentioned, to be available this afternoon on IFMA's bookstore. And I would say that this report, combined with the operations and maintenance benchmark report, the broad report, are probably some of the most widely used reports available that IFMA publishes. And the reason being is that we really focus on practices, benchmarks. It's focused on the North American sector, but I think broadly a lot of the different practices and tools that we see can be applied in a variety of different regions and locations. And hopefully that will be a benefit today as we go through this. Again, our agenda, we'll go through the benchmarking process. We'll talk about some of the facility demographics of the people who participated in the study. We'll also talk about sustainability and energy management and close it out with a discussion about management practices or maintenance practices. As you're going through this here, be sure to provide your comments in the chat box. We'll see those. We'll address those throughout the presentation. We'll also have time at the end. So if you do have questions or comments, I absolutely encourage you to provide those as we get started here, right? So when you think about benchmarking and why we do benchmarking, the main thing to think about as you have all this data, in fact, IFMA provides a number of data points in lots of different areas related to the operations of our facilities, is that benchmarking allows us to be better, faster, and more efficient in the operations of our buildings, right? And so when we think about how do we collect benchmarking data that is useful to people, we want to focus on things that is good quality information that is reliable. If we provide benchmarks that are not useful or not reflective of the actual real world conditions, then the usefulness of that data is quite limited, right? Now, I will say here is that the types of data that we do provide is quite detailed. And with that, as anybody should, when you're reading any type of data in any form, is to make sure you understand what is that data set coming from and how has that data been validated. So for example, as you go through and look at the benchmark data, if you're looking for, let's say, a building that is 20,000 square feet located in Lawrence, Kansas, that is a manufacturing facility that is built in the last 5 years and also is painted green, that might be really difficult to come by, right? So the more specific you get about finding types of buildings that are more specific to what you currently do or what the type of currently building you manage, it's more difficult to find those types of specifics. So keep that in mind here as go through and look at this data, right? The other thing we did too here is we talked with a group of facility professionals and experts, practitioners, to get their insights about what types of data that we should look at, what would be most useful to other practitioners, and we tried to incorporate that into the report. In fact, I'll highlight this as we go throughout the presentation, that there are a few new pieces of data that are new to this year's report, again, based on comments from our SMEs that they thought would be beneficial. Now, not covered in today's presentation, but in the other the broader O&M benchmark report, is that there's an entire chapter about COVID. And I know that we're tired of hearing about COVID, but we find still is that there's still a lot of impacts from COVID. In that other report, we talk about practices, impacts, cost impacts, and other practices as well related to the response of COVID-19. So if you've not taken a look at that report, I would definitely encourage you to do that. That's available on the IFMA bookstore, and you can go on there, and maybe there's a link that can provide details on that as well. A little bit about our team, about the Simplar Foundation. We are a group of researchers and educators. As Nick mentioned, I'm a professor at the University of North Carolina in Charlotte, but I also have team members at other institutions that are listed here and other universities throughout the world. We have another colleague at the University of Kansas who's also on there, and again, as I mentioned, other groups. The primary thing that we do is we work with building owners and contractors to help be more efficient in terms of delivering whatever it is we do. We do facilities work, we do procurement, project delivery, and we find that at the end of the day here, a lot of these different challenges and issues we face are tied to the people aspect. How do we find and hire excellent people that know what they're doing? And of course, that's been a major challenge. IFMA, I would say, has been prolific in terms of the types of data and benchmarks reports that are produced. This all started really in earnest before 2017, but when our team got involved was in 2017 with the North America Operations and Maintenance Benchmark Report. 2018 was a qualitative report, which today's presentation is an update to that 2018 report. Space planning in 2020. This particular one was also interesting because honestly, we finished collecting the data probably 2 weeks before like the entire world shut down. So we finished collecting data in February of 2020. And then literally 3 weeks later, many businesses and organizations shut down because of COVID. And so if you're looking for like a good benchmark of how things used to be before COVID, that particular study of the space plan in 2020 is an excellent benchmark of what things used to look like from a space planning standpoint. The other thing I'll say too is that I'll talk about this a little bit later, but this particular study, the space planning, that is currently being updated, and look out for in the next few months as we work to update that report, have new data, new allocations, how we're actually dealing with a post-COVID world, and this updated report will certainly highlight that. In 2021, we had the global salary report about FMs and what their compensation levels look like. We've done other regional ones, Asia, the Middle East was also published, Africa. We just finished that report and it's currently going through graphic design. So if you have facilities in Africa, be sure to check that out. And there's other regions as well that are available. So it's been a lot of fun here, but the main thing I want to talk about now is as we think about these different reports is how do we take these reports and do something with it? So when you think about the benchmarking process and everything that's entailed with that, there's an individual named Robert Camp. He used to work with Xerox years ago, and he was kind of what we might call the godfather of benchmarking. Now, it's tied to originally business services when he initially developed a lot of these ideas. But as you take it and extend it to facilities benchmarking, there's a lot of key practices that we need to be aware of, right? So the way benchmarking works and how you should think about using this report is to first define what it is that we're benchmarking and how you define the operations of your facility. So typically that means we have janitorial and everything that's tied with that. There's maintenance practices, and that includes both interior maintenance, exterior maintenance, staffing profiles, how you actually maintain your buildings, preventative maintenance plans. That's all would be included within the maintenance category. And then finally, utilities and energy management. Once you define, here's what we're going to benchmark, the second thing you want to do is to go out and start collecting that data. Now, if you find that in your facility, you've never really benchmarked data before, that would be a really good thing to do. In fact, at World Workplace this year, here in a few weeks, we'll be having a workshop, hands-on 4-hour workshop about how to get better at benchmarking, how to look at staffing, how to think about scoping our projects and relate that to the benchmarking process. And that should be a very good, beneficial hands-on process, right? So we collect our data. The third part of this, and that's really where a lot of the IFMA reports come in, is to compare and analyze the data that you've collected relative to the benchmarks. Or in other words, once you collect this data, how do you compare to other types of similar facilities. So if you're an office building that is in the Midwest, that is, let's say, 50,000 square feet, it would be beneficial to look at other office buildings in that location that are those similar size to see how they manage their space. How much do they pay for janitorial? How much do they pay for maintenance costs? And the reports, the IFMA reports provide that type of data that allows you to go in and compare that. Now, the other thing I'll say too about this is that just because there's a difference in what you're paying versus somebody else is not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It just means a difference. And see, that's one of the main things that you should be asking yourself is that if you see that let's say you're paying for a custodial cost, um, you know, $3.50 per square foot, and the benchmark shows about $1.90 per square foot, right? Well, that would seem that you are paying higher, and by the benchmarks, you are paying higher. But the question you ask yourself is, why is that? If you've not completed your janitorial contract in 20 years, well, that might be a good reason to go in and maybe recompete that. If you have higher costs, but you have a much higher standard of care in terms of like cleanliness of your buildings, then that can also explain as to what's going on, right? Let's say you're looking at maintenance, and let's say the average cost you spend on your building maintenance on the interior side of things is, let's say, $2 per square foot. And I believe the benchmark of that is $4 or $5 per square foot. So if you're to go to your executives and ask them, we need to have more money allocated. And if you look at these benchmarks data relative to all of our peers, you can see here that most of our colleagues, other similar types of organizations, are paying nearly double or expending nearly double what they do to maintain their buildings. And for us to be competitive, we should also invest in our facilities and to provide an effective space to do that, right? So the benchmarks allow us to do that. So to wrap all this up together here is that what I find is that most of the time when facility managers collect this data, they tend to end it right here. They collect their data, they look at different reports, they think, oh, that's kind of interesting, but that's where it ends. See, the key part of all this here is you have to do something about it. You have to take action. You have to do something different that will allow you to be more successful in terms of managing your buildings. And then obviously, rinse and repeat, keep doing this over time, and that will help you be more effective at that. You know, when I think about benchmarking, there's really what I like to call good, better, and best. So when you think about how to benchmark effectively, a good way to do benchmarking is just to do it, right? If you've never managed or collected data about your buildings, then I would just collect anything. It honestly, it really doesn't matter as long as you start collecting some data. So that's the good way to do it. The better way is to collect that data on a regular basis, right? Is to go on a year by year basis. Let's say you don't really track like cost per square foot or maybe like satisfaction levels of your occupants. If you don't do that, start doing it. That's good. Better would be than to collect that data on a yearly or quarterly or whatever type basis. The best way to do that is to collect that data on a regular basis, but then start taking that action to get more refined in types of metrics you're looking at, because that will help you become a better, what am I call, consumer of data, right? That's really what this is all about here. So for the benchmark report, the way we did this is I reviewed questions from the North America report, the previous O&M studies. We had inputs from our subject matter experts who provided excellent insights. We sent the survey to IFMA and non-IFMA members, and in total we got about 2,000, just under 2,000 survey responses received. Now, from a data standpoint, and for anybody that has ever worked in this space before, getting survey responses is really, really difficult. And for IFMA's North America studies, historically, they have been exceptional in collecting this data. Just a lot of people respond. There's a lot of interest in it because, again, the utility of that data is also a benefit. In this report, we do present data in US dollars as well as Canadian dollars. We also provide data about the conversion rates. So if you need to translate that to your own local currency, you are able to do that. And again, as we go through this, be sure to provide any questions or comments as you go. I'll see those pop up on the screen, and we'll be sure to address those as we get started here. And just keep that in mind as we go through. Okay, so let's dive into the data. Building demographics. So in terms of the building demographics, we have most of the respondents are what we call institutional buildings. So these include things like public buildings, so like schools, universities, city buildings, public works, things like that. So about 68%. 9% of those are manufacturing, so the production of goods, and the remainder of those folks are for services. Services being things like restaurants, professional services, stores where people go in and buy things. That would also be included as part of that, right? The report also provides some details about specifically within industry sectors. So like for services, we break it down by banking, financial, healthcare, and so forth. We provide data about the number of respondents and the number of buildings that is also represented about. We also provide some data too about how the buildings are structured. So a single building, which is about 66% or 2/3 of the respondents are single buildings. So imagine a single building that is providing that data. And the other types of buildings are primarily campus portfolios. So you're an FM with a series of buildings, either on one location or multiple locations, and we provide some data about that as well. We also, in this particular report, we do provide some additional detail too about building sizes and how those buildings are structured. So the building size categories of those are spaced within the building, what percentage of those are single buildings within each of these size categories. We also provide the average space of each of those buildings, the number of buildings, and some other related data to that too. So all this data here is just upfront demographic data, right? It's helping you as the reader to understand what does the data look like and where is that data coming from. That way you can help have a higher level of confidence about what is being shown here as you think about applying that to your particular location. We do have data too about geographic, where the facility is located. Again, this is by number of buildings, by location. Some locations have much higher levels of representation. So for example, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Florida, and Ontario, Canada have a number of respondents in terms of buildings. Other locations are not as well represented, but there's still data available. But again, you can, in general, you can generalize this data to other locations, even though it may not necessarily be tied to your specific location. Okay, so let's dive into some of the specific benchmarks. One of the first things we'll look at here is sustainability and energy management, and how does that apply to different types of buildings here. So the first thing that we looked at here is green janitorial practices. So what does this mean? Well, as we know that cleaning is a very labor-intensive process, right? I mean, for anybody who's worked in the space before or does this on any sort of basis, I mean, we all know that that can be a very labor-intensive process. It takes a lot of effort to do that. The challenge, though, is that for the staff and the workers that do this on a day-to-day basis, that they can be exposed to very hazardous chemicals and processes on a regular basis. Not just the chemicals themselves to clean for that, but the things they're cleaning are also hazardous. And so when you think about the frontline workers that are exposed to these hazards, that's a really big concern. It's a necessary thing that has to happen, but the reality of this is that they're exposed to dangerous, potentially dangerous situations, right? So some examples of how we look at green janitorial practices is auditing how that cleaning is done, how we implement different types of training programs, documentation, and other procedures related to that, and also staff certifications, right? So those are examples of what that will provide here. Now, I do see a question that just came up on the screen, which is, will IFMA provide a recording of our webinar? And the answer is yes. It'll be available on LinkedIn and other YouTube and other channels as well. So yes, there will be a recording provided as well. I'll also drop my email address on the bottom at the end of our presentation. You can certainly email me, and I'd be glad to send you a copy of the slides. Okay, so getting back to our green cleaning here is that we broke this down by facility size, and we looked at the usage of different types of practices. So the first one here is auditing on a periodic basis. We have training programs for our staff. We have a regular training program, and do we document that training? We have certified staff in various green cleaning practices. We document those procedures, and also we ask for respondents, well, do you do none of those practices, right? So we break this down here by facility size, and not really surprising because we see this pretty consistently, is that larger buildings tend to adopt more practices. Now, the reasons for that are varied, but obviously there's more budget available, so there's more resources to make that happen. And I think too that as facilities tend to get larger, there is more of an emphasis on these practices because there's more people affected by this, right? So if you are in a smaller type of facility and you're looking to maybe adopt some um, higher end or world class practices, these might be things to consider looking at, right? Again, I'm not necessarily saying that a larger building is a world class. Please don't misunderstand here. But one of the main things that we're looking at here is what do other people do and how do we adopt those different practices, right? We also break this data down by industry sector. So I'm only showing a screenshot here, but inside the full report, we break that down by different types of sectors here, right? So for example, in healthcare, we can see here that 62% of the respondents adopt these janitorial practices and they audit them on a periodic basis. Whereas green cleaning training programs for healthcare is not typically done for most of their staff here, right? So the reason why this table is beneficial to us is that if you're trying to understand what different people do inside their facilities, this can provide some good details about what other people do. We also break it down by facility use. And by facility use, what I mean by is how do people, well, use the building, right? Is it a bank branch? Is it an office building? All right, biosciences, correctional, data, education, and lots of other categories. So again, the intent of this is to provide different details about what do other similar types of facilities do and how do you line up with that. The other thing that we also looked at, we asked respondents is, do you track carbon footprint monitoring? So what this looks at, again, we break this down by facility size, the percentage of respondents that track their carbon emissions, and also the percentage of respondents that do not track their carbon emissions. We break this down by industry sector, by facility use, and also by region or location. So again, if you're looking to say, what do other people do with regards to this particular metric, this is a good way to go in there and understand how other people do things. Now, other programs are out there too, focusing more on the energy side of things, is that respondents want to know what is actually out there, right? So we asked respondents, again, we broke it down by size and other sorts of demographic factors here, but the use of Energy Star programs, LEAD, life cycle assessment, environmentally preferred purchasing programs, measuring and monitoring, ISSO standards, Green Globes, and other types of programs. So the report provides extensive detail based on the facility size, location, use, and sector that breaks it down. What are people using and what are the impact of that? It has overall statistics about what this includes, right? We also break this down by 34 different industry sectors and also 19 different facility use types. We also have regional data, and also we looked at the biggest impact to energy consumption in different programs. What we found, for example, is that Energy Star in general had the biggest impact to reducing those energy use requirements. Again, the full report, which is available from IFMA, provides more detail about that. And we also look at the impact of other types of programs like LEAD and life cycle assessments and other things. Again, we provide details about how do those actually reduce consumption. The other thing here, this is new to this year's report, is how many people are dedicated just to managing energy use. And so we break this down just like all the other data by facility size, sector, use, and location. And so, for example, this respondent shows, so there are 59 respondents that have facility sizes less than 50,000 square feet. Of those respondents, 10% of them have staff that are dedicated to the energy management side of things. Of those people, 5.5 FTEs or full-time equivalents do provide some data about that. And then 90% of them do not have dedicated staff, right? And what we see here in this particular example is that, again, as you go down in size, or in other words, as facility size increases, there's more prevalences or more instances of people having dedicated staff to these various functions, right? So again, the full report provides a lot more detail about what that looks like. In terms of energy management practices, we again break this down by other tools as well. Energy audits, strategic planning, hiring consultants, strategic energy management in place, has a written plan for that. Energy-related due diligence for new real estate buildings, and also gaining ISO 14001 certifications. Now, I will say that this edition here of asking about ISO certification, this was a new area. We had previously not asked about that, but it was recommended that we include that for this year's report, and we did. I find that most people don't actually use that certification, at least for North America. It's not very commonly used. So again, the report has more detail about that. Again, lots of questions going on in the chat box right now. If you do have other questions, definitely jump in here, and we'll certainly address that either now or at the end of our presentation. So switching gears here for a moment, we're going to focus on maintenance now. Now, one of the new things that's included in this report is the ratios of in-house versus contracted maintenance staff. So in-house staff are people that work for the organization. So if I work for the University of North Carolina and an employee works and gets paid by the university, they would be considered a in-house staff. Now, I'm going to jump in here. Ashley, if I'm echoing, please let me know about that. But otherwise, this hopefully sounds okay on my side. But Ashley, if it's not coming through, please let me know, and I will work to get that fixed. So getting back to our report, all right, everything sounds to be good here. So in-house are people that work directly for the organization. Contracted staff are when you hire somebody out to do that services. So we break down the maintenance staff is what percentage of them are in-house staff. So you can see here that, for example, for facilities that are less than 50,000 square feet, about half of them are in-house staff, 8% are contracted out, and the remainder 39% of maintenance staff are a combination. Now, if you are looking at this and you might be thinking, well, how many people do I need to hire? That's a different report. So IFMA's broader North America O&M report will provide details about what that entails. So if you're looking for the actual number of FTEs, the North America, the other report has details about that. What this will show is the ratio of in-house staff versus contracted staff. And again, we have it by size, location, industry sector, and facilities. Has quite a good data about what this entails. Another thing we looked at here is what is the use of preventative maintenance planning and how many FMs use this, right? So you can see here that as an example, we have HVAC buildings. So 92% of our respondents used HVAC preventative maintenance plans. Fire services, this was a new category this year, 77%, electrical, roofing, and so forth. So again, if you're looking to maybe enhance or streamline or update what types of preventative maintenance programs you have, this will give you a really good starting point that you may want to do, right? So if you don't currently have a HVAC preventative maintenance plan that is updated and that you know where it's at and that you've looked at it, this will hopefully be a call to action here to consider updating it, knowing the fact that 90% of your peers currently do this here. Now, we also provide this data by different types of industry sectors. So again, I mentioned 35 sectors. So we break down by banking, financial, healthcare, hospitality, and all the different types of services that are provided by these different sectors here. So again, a lot of data. I know this might be overload for some folks, but I'm trying to illustrate the type of data that's available inside of this report. We also break it down by different types of categories. So we break this down by time-based, by plan-based, by reactive-based, and other types of measures here that this full report will provide lots of details about what this entails here, right? So the last thing I want to talk about, this is not really part of the report, but I know that the staffing part of it is an interesting question. And I thought I would spend just a moment here talk about some workforce things. I would find that out of all the benchmark reports that IFMA produces, the number and the ratios of staffing is by far the biggest thing that people ask about. So I want to spend a minute here just to talk about some of these workforce things because I think it's such a big issue. And likely, I mean, it'd be great for all of you to chime in here, but how many of you have challenges right now finding people? Yes, and if we're all together, we'd have a big discussion about that because my guess here is that most of you cannot find enough people, cannot find enough qualified people to do that, right? Jump in the chat box. Let us know here. Do you struggle with this as well? So I want to talk about for a minute why that happens and what's going on here, right? So in this chart here, again, this is just based on US data, but I think globally, this is a pretty similar because of lots of historical reasons, but this is pretty representative of most locations, right? The blue lines represents the number of people and their age categories in 2007, right? Now, this data is a little bit old, but it's still changed because the demographics are consistent with that. So we have, people ages 15, there's 39, all the way up to 79 in other categories. But this shows you the number of people that are in each of these categories here, right? So this is 2007. Here's 2014. And the reason why I chose 2014 is because of the stark difference. And when you look at the most recent data from 2019, the data has continued to look like this, right? So when you look at 2007 versus 2014, this group right here, what we call this here is the missing generation. And just as Sherwin has commented here, it's difficult to find people who have the right mix of experience and academic qualifications, right? This group of people, what we call the mission generation that was here previously, this group here had a high level of experience. And what we find here is that as that group of people tends to get older and start retiring, right? Many of us have seen this as well, is that this is a major issue, right? A lot of these people that have all this expertise have now left the workforce. And so as you look at the reinforcements, like the new generation coming on board, from a number standpoint, there's not nearly as many of them. Now, my hat's off to IFMA, to the IFMA Foundation, and to other people here that have really taken initiatives to address these concerns, right? So when you look at this here, we have some historical data to really understand this. And folks, if this is not of interest, I apologize for that, but I think this is really, really applicable to a lot of this. And I think this is quite fascinating, right? Our team in 2010, so this is 13 years ago now, is we did a study of FMs and we asked them, how many years until you retire? In 2010, we find that about half of the FM workforce was projecting to retire by 2020, right? Now, 2020 has since come and passed. There's a pandemic with all that right here. But obviously, there's more workforce. There's replenishments coming in here. But as you look at this here, is that at the time, 10 years ago, we had major, major concerns about the number of people that are retiring and how that's going to affect FM. The most recent report from 2021, which is IFMA's salary report, has more details about this. And what we find here is that the average FM workforce has started to trend a little bit younger. And the reason why that is, of course, is because the older generation has started retiring. There's new people coming in, which is a good thing here. But the challenge, though, again, as I mentioned, is that as all those people with all that expertise now extract themselves from the workforce, that means there's, in some places, a lack of knowledge as to how to effectively do things, right? The other thing we also looked at here is succession planning, right? In 2010, we talked to people, what does your succession planning look like? 64% of the people we talked with said they do not have any succession plan in place for FM. 64%, which is incredible, right? And if you think about why that's so incredible or really concerning, is that if you are a senior FM or you have a group of people that really know how to operate your building and they retire, guess what? New people will come in and they have no idea what this previous person used to do, right? Now, at the same time, we know that if people have been around for an extended period of time, we can get maybe stale or not up to date as to how things are done, right? There might be better ways to do things, and I'm not certainly advocating for either way of that. But the reality of this here, and commonly, many of you probably dealt with this before, is that when people retire, we lose that institutional knowledge about what they can do here, right? So it's really concerning. And as a result of this, we're taking steps together with IFMA to address some of these concerns here, right? We did some other research about this too, as we asked how long does it take to put together an effective succession plan? On average, we found 9 years to get this done. Now, this data was based on construction companies, so it's not the same as FM, but I think it still has indications as to what we can think about for FM, right? The way that 9 years broke down was 2 years for finding people to take over, 3 years to plan and train that person that is getting ready to take over. And then finally, 4 years for transitioning. Again, this is a little bit longer because this data comes from construction companies, but from an FM standpoint, I think there's many similar types of practices and trends that we also see as why people move on. The number one reason why people left their position and thus had to have that succession in place is due to poor or unexpected health conditions, right? If somebody gets sick or passes away, then that is very quickly necessitates people to come in and take over that, right? So it's very difficult. It takes a lot of effort. We asked facility managers, what percentage of you would be interested in new tools that help to better plan for and respond to succession planning? 90% of FMs in 2021 said they would like a tool like this, right? So to put all this together into perspective and give you all an update as to what we're doing to deal with this here, a couple other thoughts here, right? Filling the gap is only half the battle. In other words, replacing the people that have left is important, but that doesn't address everything, right? Traditionally, what happens is we take our mid-level employees and promote them into senior positions. But our recommendation here, or our pleading here almost, is that we need to make an adjustment, right? That bubble of not having people is addressed here, but the experiential loss in knowledge is a huge problem, right? We can't just replace warm bodies with other warm bodies and expect it to be the same way. We actually need people that know what to do here, right? And when this happens, loss of efficiency, innovation, growth, skill, all of these other things here are major issues, right? We also find here that there's been very little work done in this area. Okay, so to set the stage for what we're doing here is that one of the things that we have started doing is to collect personality profiles for different types of positions. We've done this in construction. We've done it for mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, procurement people, and now facility managers. So Ashley, if you want to pop on the screen here, what we're going to do is we're collecting volunteers and we want to develop personality profiles for facility managers. And the reason why this tool is going to be so impactful is that as you as an FM want to go out and understand, like, what do people look like and how do we find people that are good fits for our organization, this profile will be really beneficial for that, right? So if you go onto the QR code, and Ashley, I don't know if we can jump into our chat box here or drop a link here. If you fill out the survey and volunteer to participate, there's a couple things that are going to happen. The first thing is that for you personally, we're going to give you, and only you, a free copy of your personality profile. Now, what does that include? It includes emotional intelligence, includes what's called Hexaco, and the third one is called DISC. So if you want a copy of your free personality profile, please click on the link, scan a code, the QR link, and that would bring you directly to what that looks like, right? So take a look at that. Ashley has just dropped in the chat box here a link for that. So if you want to volunteer and get involved on this, this is an extremely exciting study that, in my view, is going to have huge impacts. The biggest thing that's going to help us do as practitioners is know, what does a good fit for an FM look like from a personality standpoint. So please volunteer. If you have questions, I'll put my email address on the screen, but we need volunteers. And I highly, highly encourage you all to do that because that'll make a big difference. So that kind of wraps up the main part of our presentation today here. Just as more as a FYI, we do have some other projects coming up. Space planning, as I mentioned, we are actively working on that right now. We're also working on our global 12-city study. So we're going to develop benchmarks for the 12 largest cities throughout the world. So Toronto, Mexico City, Lagos, and several other cities as well are all on the list here to develop those benchmarks. We're also doing medical center benchmarks. We just finished the draft of that. That's currently going through review right now. So if you work in healthcare, medical centers, we'll have some new benchmarks about that. We also have another report about the state of U.S. military veterans in facility management. Again, for here in the U.S., that is a very strong topic. I think there is huge opportunity, and we have some new data and some insights as to what that looks like. Amenities is another project that's going to be coming online later next year about what's offered in terms of our spaces, right? What do we offer people inside the building? What does that look like? And we have some details about that. Return to office is another one, about what are the lessons learned as we bring people back to the office. That one is ready to go live here very soon, so be sure to take a look for that. And several other studies about life cycle costing, the human dimensions thing, and a bunch of other projects all coming down the line here. It's very, very exciting. So in summary here, we'll have time for Q&A. If you'd like a copy of the slides, or you have other questions, or you want to volunteer for our study about the human dimension side of it, be sure to drop me an email, jake.smithwick@charlotte.edu. You can also go to the IFMA bookstore to download a copy of the report. It'll be available this afternoon. The other IFMA Operation Benchmark report is also available. And otherwise, we'll take some time for questions. Feel free to type in the chat box here, and we'll see that, and we'll give a few minutes for Q&A here. We got some other visitors. Jose from Brazil, thank you for being here. Fantastic. Any other questions or comments? Everybody, a few minutes. Okay. Well, if not here, folks, again, please feel free to close it out. Again, we on behalf of IFMA, we sincerely appreciate your time today to be here. We hope that the report is of value. Be sure to check out the IFMA bookstore, and otherwise we'll go from there. Actually, before we close out here, we actually do have a couple of questions. One person wants to know where we can download the PowerPoint slides. Best way, drop me an email, jake.smithwick@charlotte.edu, and here I'll be glad to send that to you. Don was talking, any notes on the labor rate escalations? Ooh, Don, great question. Great question about labor rate escalations. So that has been a major issue. We've seen that globally, nationally across the U.S. here, about how to deal with that. The reality this year is the fact that there's not enough people to do the work. In fact, the jobs report from the federal government just came out a few weeks ago. You can take a look at that here. But the biggest thing to think about here is that as wage rates have started going up, which some would argue is a good thing, right? But regardless, wage rates have started going up. That's also accounting for the fact that inflation is also a major issue, right? So as FMs, I think one of the major things to kind of answer Don's question fully here is that as FMs, we are constantly faced with lack of resources, right? We don't have enough money. In fact, they're always trying to cut our budgets. And so that's a major concern about this, right? The way I would think about this and to kind of deal with this is that we want to hire people that know what they're doing. They have a tremendous level of expertise, because I can have 2 people and pay twice the money, or maybe hire 1 or 1.5 people, part-time people that can have better insights and have better levels of skills and expertise to be able to do that, right? Don, if you have more specific questions, we do have some additional data that's not included in our presentation today. I can certainly send you a copy of that. But the labor situation is difficult right now. Finding people is difficult right now. And there's a lot more to that behind that. In general, people who are credentialed, CFM, FMP, SFP, we have found that the return on investment for those particular credentials from a labor standpoint is 16 to 1. So the value that people get out of getting credentialed is absolutely impactful here. So Don, I don't know if that answers your questions, but feel free to reach out to me directly and be glad to share any other data that you may have an interest in. So, okay, folks. Well, if there's nothing else here, thanks for your time today. We sincerely appreciate it. And until next time, take care, everybody. Bye.